Hey everybody, Sean from Movie Assault here, and it is time for episode 2 of Shark Flicks. This time out, I'm going to be looking at the numerous Jaws ripoffs that have come out over the years, and I'm focusing on the years between 1976 and 1995. That's going to be kind of the spread of the movies I'm including here. And we'll start with the first that I know of what I would call a Jaws ripoff or a Jaws knockoff would be Mako, the Jaws of Death from 1976. And this was one of the first films to cash in or attempt to cash in on the popularity of Jaws, which had come out the previous year, 1975. It features Richard Jackal, who stars as Sonny Stein, who discovers in the Philippines, I believe, that he has this ability to telepathically communicate with sharks. And what he does is he goes back home to Florida. He lives in the Keys of Florida, and he basically patrols around in his boat, and if he sees somebody harming or hurting or fishing for or killing sharks, he goes after them and uses his telepathic powers to have the sharks basically take revenge on those people. Unfortunately, he's exploited by several people who want to take advantage of his gift. I'll leave it up to you to watch the movie to discover how that happens. The one thing that's interesting about this movie is that the director, William Greffe, or Grafe, I'm not 100% sure how to pronounce it. I know he's extremely popular with cult movie fans, but I am not that familiar with his work. This is the only one I've seen, so I don't really know too much about him. But I know he says that the movie was, or at least the script was in production before Jaws came out. So it's really not a Jaws ripoff. It just happened to be sort of fortuitous that it came out 1 year after Jaws. It's really not a Jaws ripoff in terms of trying to ape the plot of Jaws, like so many of the other films I'm going to be talking about today. But it's an interesting film because it has sort of a pro-shark message. Sonny is convinced that the sharks are not mindless killing machines, and people who are taking advantage of them and killing them just for sport are doing harm to his friends. So it was a little bit of ahead of its time. The only problem I really have with it, it's not a great movie by any stretch of the imagination, but the main problem that I do have with it is that for filming it, they didn't use any protective cages or any mechanical sharks or anything like that, and they actually used that to promote the film because there was so much hubbub over the mechanical shark in Jaws. But what they did use were sedated tiger sharks. Some of the tiger sharks seem to have had their teeth pulled out, which I can't imagine is a very painless process for the shark. And in a couple of scenes, sharks are injured or one is even killed on camera. Now, I don't know if those sequences were filmed specifically for the movie or were stock footage that were used, but either way, it's sort of a hypocritical film because it's celebrating sharks as being something that needs to be protected, but also killed sharks for the production of the film. So I'm highly against anything that would kill a shark because they're really necessary animals. But it's worth seeing. It's an interesting film. Next up would be from 1977. It's called Tinterra Killer Shark. And this is a British-Mexican co-production that came out in 77. And it's interesting because it is also less of a Jaws ripoff. Again, it doesn't follow the formula of Jaws, but it does take advantage of the popularity of shark-themed films. And it's more of I would call it sort of a combination of a Cinemax movie and a shark film. And if you know what I mean by a Cinemax movie, the late night fare that used to play, at least as far as I know, still does, on Cinemax, the softcore porn movies. The plot centers around a love triangle between a woman and two men, Steve and Miguel, and their enemies The two men are enemies, but they're both attracted to this same woman. But when this woman gets killed by a shark, they kind of team up and they just start killing sharks. Again, this was made in an era where sharks were seen as disposable, killing machines, mindless eating machines, so they were an enemy of all people rather than being beneficial to the oceans, so they were just killed mindlessly. And again, this film features a lot of footage of sharks being killed. A sea turtle actually is killed in this movie. But then these men, they pair up with another woman and they end up in another love triangle. This movie isn't very good. There are actually two versions of the movie. There's one that it's 85 minutes long, and that's the one that I saw. And then there's a 2-hour and 1-minute version. I have not seen that. I can't imagine what they would have padded that out with plot-wise, so I'm assuming it's probably more shark footage or needless brutality against sharks. I have no idea. But this is a movie that I wouldn't necessarily recommend as worth seeing. It is interesting, though, because it does have a soundtrack that was created by Basil Palladouris, who is known for his work on RoboCop and The Hunt for Red October. He's a very well-known musician. And I don't remember the soundtrack specifically being good or bad, but it is interesting that he was the one that created it. Next up is a film called Up from the Depths, which is a Roger Corman co-production. He produced it with Sierra Santiago. It was made in the Philippines. It is more of a Jaws ripoff in the plot. The actual shark is sort of a shark-like creature. I included it because even though there were a lot of Jaws ripoffs in the years following Jaws that didn't include sharks, there was like Grizzly and Alligator and all these, giant animal movies, giant animal attack movies. I wanted to focus on only shark movies for this particular episode of Shark Flicks. I included this one because it's such a shark-like creature that I thought it sort of was like a gray area, so I would include it. But this is a movie that was originally filmed as a comedy, and then when it was screened, Roger Corman said, wait, what? I wanted a horror movie. This is not what I wanted at all. And it was made on the back of Piranha, which is one of the more famous Jaws ripoffs, which actually did very well at the box office, and actually is a really great movie. But it had a lot of comedic elements and horror elements combined. The thought was maybe to do the same type of thing with this movie. It was directed by Charles B. Griffith. So they went back and they shot some new scenes. They also had some new shark effects done by Chris Wallace, who went on to do effects for a lot of other movies and a lot of other TV shows. He's well known. Up from the Depths, though, is really kind of a hokey, uneven, not worth seeing film. Compared to Tinterra, it's better, but it's because it's funnier in a not so intentional way. But it is interesting to see from that perspective. Next up is a movie that I actually saw in the theaters when it was released. It was released in the United States in 1981 theatrically as Great White, but it is known now as The Last Shark. And this is a movie that was pulled from theaters because it is too similar to Jaws. Universal actually sued and had this movie removed from theaters. This was directed by Enzo Castellari. It does feature a mechanical shark, and if you look there at the bottom of the DVD, those two pictures are featuring the mechanical shark. Plot-wise, it is very, very similar to Jaws. The original novel of Jaws was, of course, written by Peter Benchley. There's a character in this film called Peter Benton. And there is Vic Morrow, who is known for a lot of work. Unfortunately, he was killed in 1981. I believe it was 1981 or 1982, on the set of the Twilight Zone movie. He's in this. This is one of his later roles, and he is Ron Hamer, who's sort of this knockoff of Quint from Jaws. The plot is very similar to Jaws and Jaws 2 combined. Of course, you've got a great white shark killing people. And taken on its own merits, it's really not that bad of a movie. The mechanical shark is pretty cool. There is some bad miniature work that is pretty embarrassing. But overall, as shark movies go, it's not terrible. If you just view it on its own merits, it's not too bad. It's not a great production by any stretch of the imagination. It is an Italian knockoff film. It was made on the cheap. Some of these actors have never acted before or since. But James Franciscus is in it. Vic Morrow is in it. So it had some credibility. Like I said, I did see it in theaters, and I enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty decent. Then moving on, we go to 1990's Deep Blood, which was directed by the prolific Joe D'Amato, and he dabbled in everything from horror to porn. And it's another Italian sharksploitation movie that attempts, in theory, to incorporate something unusual. It has sort of this Native American element to it. Supposedly the shark in this movie is some sort of evil ocean spirit. The execution, unfortunately, leaves a lot to be desired. The cast members, most of whom, like The Last Shark, have never acted before or since. There are no big names in this movie at all, except for, I can't remember their names. There's a comedian, a female comedian, and her husband, Mitzi McCall. I'll put the name scroll below because I can't remember. They're in a very brief scene together. But the script doesn't really help out this cast, who is, again, made up of a bunch of nobodies. The directing and the pacing is completely wonky. There's a climactic scene which drags on for 13 minutes, and it basically consists of people getting themselves in the water and getting explosives and swimming down and setting them, and then swimming back up and getting more explosives and swimming down and setting them. It's very repetitive and just basically to pad out the running time. So there's never any suspense in this movie. But the most critical thing about this movie is the fact that there are really no, aside from a very brief mechanical shark head that you see, I think, in 2 scenes, all of the other shark footage is either supplied by a terrible, cheap fin that cuts through the water, or stock footage that was reportedly purchased from National Geographic. So you never see the victims and the shark together at the same time. You'll see a scene of a shark, and then you'll see a scene of somebody thrashing around, flailing around in pink water. The blood looks like they poured sort of cotton candy or something into the water. It looks awful. Not cotton candy like it's foamy, but cotton candy color. It looks off. One thing that I've neglected to mention when I talked about the original Jaws in episode 1 was the music by John Williams. It absolutely set the tone for the film and heightened the suspense, and it was actually sort of a very main ingredient to the success of the entire film. Here, in Deep Blood, the music is almost random synthesizer stabs. It does nothing to heighten the tension. So you can imagine what it does when there's the soundtrack playing over the seemingly countless scenes of people standing around talking and spouting dialogue that is nonsensical most of the time. This is a movie that can be avoided pretty easily. The last movie I want to talk about today is probably the most notorious of the Jaws ripoffs, because it's not just a Jaws ripoff, it is a ripoff of other ripoffs, and that is Cruel Jaws. And this is from Bruno Mattei. This is another Italian sharksploitation film. This is a relative latecomer. This is from 1995. But this is a film that has to be seen to be believed. It not only does it rip off Jaws, the plot of a great white shark attacking people, although here it calls it a tiger shark, even though clearly in 90% of the footage it is a great white. but it uses footage from Jaws, illegally probably. It uses footage from The Last Shark. It uses footage from Deep Blood, right down to footage that was filmed specifically for Deep Blood and not just the shark stock footage. And it even includes music from Star Wars. So this really has to be seen to be believed. And I showed you the mechanical shark from The Last Shark, and look at the mechanical shark, quote unquote, from Cruel Jaws. It's the same shark because it's the same footage. This is a movie that just really is hilarious. Now this was released in some markets as Jaws 5, which, if you can believe it or not. But that becomes kind of understandable when you realize this is the work of Bruno Mattei, who released a movie in 1989 called Shocking Dark, which was also marketed in some areas as Terminator 2. So that's kind of the whole gimmick of the Italian ripoff film industry, is to sort of make sequels to movies that aren't really authorized as sequels. He's billed here as William Snyder, but make no mistake, this is a Bruno Mattei film. And the funny thing about the version I got on Blu-ray from Severin Films is that there is a home video version and the Snyder cut. You can see up in the top left-hand corner there, or I'm sorry, the top right-hand corner. I don't know it's left hand on my camera. And I haven't seen that. It's called the ultra-violent or extra-violent Japanese cut, available for the first time in America. This is the Troll 2 of killer shark movies, and a level of cinematic thievery never experienced before. So this really has to be seen to be believed, just because of the audaciousness of what it has plundered for its plot. Not only has it stolen the plot of many shark movies, it's stolen footage from other shark movies. So there you go. That's episode 2 of Shark Flicks, the Jaws ripoffs. Stay tuned for the next episode, episode 3, which will be the new wave of shark films, which will start in the late 90s. And I'll talk about some of the newer films, but not necessarily the newest films that feature killer sharks. So thanks again for watching, everybody. As always, feel free to rate, comment, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Hit that thumbs up and like this video because it helps me out a lot. And I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Take it easy.